Hi everybody, let's talk about cross-site scripting. There's a little bit of prerequisites in this video. So if you're not familiar with web applications and how they kind of some of the core basics and fundamentals on how a web application works, check out my previous video about web application security fundamentals, where I'll introduce you to kind of the core concepts of user agents, HTML, HTTP, JavaScript code, the same origin policy, as well as cookies. So that's really necessary for you to kind of quickly grasp these vulnerabilities that we are going to discuss in this series, including cross-site scripting. So yeah, uh, cross-site scripting. This is sort of my favorite vulnerability, I think, and I'm always sort of uh, under the I very strongly believe you should never finish or stop a pen test until you actually have found a cross-site scripting vulnerability in a web application. It's very common, um, and there's a lot of like detail to it. And in this video, I just want to give you sort of the high-level picture, what to look for, and how it actually works. To get started, let's look at a web application. We have our user, Bob, let's see, and he's using this web application. And then we have Mallory, and she is sort of the attacker up here, and she found a vulnerability in this application. She now sends a link to this application. It's just a forum application of some form. And she sends this malicious link in an email that contains some JavaScript code to Bob down here. So now this link is sort of somehow Bob clicks this link. For some reason, he ends up clicking the link either in a phishing email or it could be some other way he found this on the internet and he clicks that link. So now that web request is being made from Bob's machine in the browser, right? Bob's clicked that link and sends this link, including that JavaScript payload that is part of this query parameter, over to the web application. So now there's what is this attack, this piece of what the attacker controlled, Mallory, is this JavaScript that is in the URL. And now it happens that the web application actually has this cross-site scripting vulnerability, and it does not correctly like encode this name query parameter in the document that it sends back to the user. So for some reason, this name attribute is being put in the HTML document, but it is not correctly encoded. So it actually is purely like the script tag is part of the HTML document, and actually the code is now running and in this document, which means now this JavaScript code that we saw that Mallory sent in is running in the browser. And what an adversary would usually do, in this case Mallory, right, they would then have the code sent, for instance, a cookie back to the attacker, and then they have access to that user session on that domain that they had the exploit for. So this is called reflector cross-site scripting because the input is reflected back immediately. So the attacker needs to forge a link and then trick the user into visiting or clicking that link, and then it gets the malicious input in that link is reflected back as code in the output. So this is what we call reflected cross-site scripting. There's multiple other variations of this, and one more I'll go into detail is called persistent cross-site scripting, which is sort of a similar idea, and I'll walk you through that real quick. And then there's also client-side or DOM-based cross-site scripting, which is very popular with single page applications that you have a lot of JavaScript rendering and changing of the DOM on the client side, and there's problems. And same thing like encoding that does not happen uh, on the client side. So let's look at persistent cross-site scripting. So similar, we have our application that the user uses, and we have our attacker up here. So in this case is somehow the attacker is able to store data in the application. So it might be our forum application where the user can just create a post in a forum, or the user might change their own profile. Somehow the user is able to just have the script code just be stored somewhere in a database. It might be the username, it might be the description, or as I mentioned, it might be the message of a email content. It contains this script code. So that's what the attacker stores or Mallory stores in the database somehow in this application. So this is sort of this prerequisites. This is this what makes it persistent. So we have now this JavaScript code being persistent in the database. And now Bob, our user, is just going into the forum and looking at posts, right? He's just browsing the forum and looking at posts, and he runs across this post from Mallory, and uh, the application reads this string from the database, puts it in the HTML document, and sends the post back for Bob to view it in the browser. But since the encoding did not happen, that JavaScript that the attacker had inserted is now running inside the browser. And similar as before, right now the attacker fully controls what the user is seeing on the screen. They could show a phishing page, or they could like send off the cookie to the attacker again, and then sort of the attacker can take control of the user session. So this is called persistent cross-site scripting. What is so important about this is that the lock icon and TLS and does not protect you from this attack. So this is does not matter, and this is something that I think if you're new to this, might not be as obvious. So, but this is one thing I really want to point out. Context matters. So, depending on where the vulnerability of the application is, right, is sort of different variations of the attack need to be like experimented with and figured out. Uh, if you remember from our introduction session about web applications and how HTML works, right? There's different kind of things in HTML. There's elements, there's attributes, there's string literals, right? And all of them have sort of a different context on how they are being introduced in the document, right? And which means the attacker needs to use a little different variations of strings to be able to probe for this problem. And you see sort of these variations, for instance, right? A URL might be another example, or templating, right? Which is sort of this client-side vulnerability that might, it could also be server-side, but often with Angular, for instance, it would be on the client side. So the attacker is trying to break out of this parsing context and then control the rest of the document at this point. So it's an injection vulnerability. And the vulnerability is mitigated by correctly encoding this user data that is data and not code into its representation that makes it data and not code. So there's like HTML encoding methods or HTML attribute encoding methods that can take care of that in various programming frameworks. So depending on the framework, there's various options, but this is sort of this high level idea what needs to happen. So context is that really matters to mitigate the injection problem. And here's a kind of a popular string that I've been using a lot is sort of this idea of closing an attribute and an HTML element tag and then introducing an image tag, but setting the source to be invalid, which then causes an error, and then it implements an error handler in the same line, which then runs code, in this case, just opening an alert message box on the screen. So this is sort of a common string that I use for testing. And now to give you a few examples of cross-site scripting in the wild, like this is a cross-site scripting vulnerability I found in AWS in the console. What was the problem here was that when you create an EC2 instance, you can create tags, and there was a injection vulnerability in the key and value pairs. So you could inject exactly the example that I showed you with an HTML tag. In this case, I had not actually used an alert box initially. This is the very first screenshot, I think, when I found it. But I had an H1 tag. So you could see the web server was not like a regular string. It actually was an H1 tag. And then I wrote this further to actually have really like elevating from one user to another. And here you can see like the sort of an obligatory message box that shows you which domain was controlled by the attacker. And the second example I want to provide is Visual Studio Code. So the reason I want to show you this is that uh, you might think it's always the user agent is always a browser. Not necessarily, right? The regular browser. It could be any kind of application that does render HTML. And Visual Studio Code is a very popular programming environment, and it has a Python extension, which I'm using a lot for doing machine learning work. And then I was playing around with this sort of very similar example that I showed you earlier with the image tag, and that's how I found injection vulnerability. And in this case, what is unique about it was it's a problem that only occurs in an exception handling block. So when there was an error, so if the attacker controls any data that is part of the exception, then this was unescaped and interpreted as code. So what I went ahead when I reported this to Microsoft, I wrote sort of a proof of concept showing, and this is might be interesting for you now, how you can see more of the power that comes with having script execution. So here you see a script tag, so we start running JavaScript and then we add an event listener for the key down event. So whenever a user presses a key, we create a new image tag with a source that points to the attacker's web server, sending off the key that was actually pressed. So that was installed in the notebook, and then when the user was typing in the notebook, every single keystroke the user was typing is being sent off to the attacker's web server. So this is sort of a way uh, JavaScript can be used by an adversary to sort of steal keystrokes. Okay, so let's talk again a little bit more about mitigation. So the mitigation, the real mitigation is encoding the output, considering the appropriate context of where the injection or where the data is inserted into the document. Uh, that is really the critical piece. Input validation is very useful and very good. If possible, you should always allow list certain pieces of data, right, rather than allowing every kind of data into the application. And similarly, there's HTTP response headers that are very effective in mitigating in case you make mistakes and you're not encoding correctly, the developer is not correctly encoding the output. You can use certain HTTP response headers, like the content security policy, to prevent script execution or to prevent certain things from happening. Similarly with the set cookie, um, when cookies are being set, right, there's a couple of flags like HTTP only, which we kind of talked in the previous session, the secure attribute and the same site attribute that sort of mitigate the kind of damage that can happen when cross-site scripting is actually occurring on our website. Okay, I hope this was interesting and useful. Sort of a very brief introduction. I kind of want to keep those sessions short. Let me know how you like it. If there's anything specific you want me to cover next, I'm gonna dive into cross-site request forgery as well as depth nabbing soon. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and I hope I see you next time again. Have a great day.